McLaren and Mercedes have huge upgrades planned for the next race. Toto gives his verdict on the driver versus FIA situation, and Franco continues to get hyped. Do consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get straight into the latest F1 news. Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff has asked for a civilized approach to the current controversy over swearing, in the wake of the FIA punishing Max Verstappen for use of a swear word. In Singapore's Thursday press conference, Verstappen was reflecting on the previous race in Azerbaijan, had described his car as "fucked," to which the FIA took a dim view and handed him the equivalent of community service. Verstappen was incensed by this, and thus took the approach of saying as little as possible in the following press conferences, instead choosing to speak to the media outside. Wolff recounted the time that he and Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur were hauled in front of the stewards for using bad language in Las Vegas, but noted that greater nuance was perhaps needed. "I was at the stewards last year after Las Vegas, and it was quite an enjoyable experience. Fred and I were there at the same time. He was a bit more worried," Wolff said. "I said to them it was the first time since school that I was called to the headmaster, and I promise you it is going to be the last. Having said that, I think there is an argument that big swearing and being rude on the radio is not something that should happen. If it is so bad it is disrespectful towards the other side of the line, there are people at home watching it. The F word is common language now, but it is always the context that makes it. We want to have emotions. We want to have raw moments, and we understand that the drivers are in a state of extremes. But if we can dim it down a little bit, then that is good for all of us, but I wouldn't necessarily ban the F word because I think there is worse and worse words than that. I don't think that using the F word in a press conference is the worst thing, but okay, if we need to adapt, all of us adapt our language, including team principals, then we will look at it more. It is more civilized like this." Red Bull team boss Christian Horner added that the situation could have been dealt with in a different manner, feeling that a solution that avoided the same blowback might have been more fitting. He denied that he had asked Verstappen to tone down his language in the car, noting that the difference should be in the context between media sessions and in the car. "Max has made his feelings clear on it," Horner explained. "Of course, all these drivers are role models, but language that's used in everyday life. I think it would have been perhaps better dealt with slightly differently, which would have avoided any awkwardness. I'm not sure how much he's talking in the FIA press conference now, but I assume it's relatively little. I suppose the difference was between a press conference and in the car, but for a driver who English is not his native tongue. We've seen members of the royal family telling photographers to take a fucking photo, so reactions need to be relative." Sergio Perez doubled his praise of rookie driver Franco Colapinto and reckoned the young Argentine didn't put a foot wrong in his defense at the Singapore Grand Prix. Colapinto once again impressed in Singapore with a brave move into Turn 1, which ensured he got up to 9th place on the opening lap. He then held his own in defense against Perez, which stifled the Mexican driver's progress in the first 28 laps. Over the radio, Perez put aside his frustration to speak highly of Colapinto, stating, "He's very good, difficult to pass," as the Mexican remained in the FW46's wheel tracks. Perez took the opportunity to pit at the end of the 28th tour, and although Williams responded to bring Colapinto in a lap later, the offset was enough for Perez to just undercut his fellow Latin American. Colapinto followed Perez home by 1.6 seconds at the flag, having been unable to close to within DRS range towards the end, as Perez was in turn stuck behind Nico Hülkenberg. "He did a fantastic race," Perez added at the end of the race. "He didn't put a foot wrong. It was very difficult to keep up with him at the time, and it was just a difficult race. In the end, we managed to do the undercut on him, but that was the only one we could do." Colapinto was grateful for Perez's comments, more so given that he spent his childhood supporting the Red Bull driver while watching F1. This did not mask Colapinto's disappointment not to manage points, which he put down to going too long on the medium tires, which made him susceptible to getting undercut. "I was trying to push," he said. "Checo is a super nice guy, and I grew up watching him racing in F1, waking up early in Argentina, and supporting him as a guy from Mexico. This was the closest to us. It was very nice to support him when I was little, and now it's even better to be racing against him. It's a pity to not have finished with points after a good effort. But yeah, it is what it is. Also decent race, but we made some mistakes that didn't let us finish in the points. When you do everything perfect, we were not perfect today, and I think that's why we are not in the points." McLaren has admitted that it faces a dilemma over whether to introduce floor upgrades to its dominant MCL38 Formula One car. The Woking-based team was in a class of its own at the Singapore Grand Prix, with Lando Norris running unchallenged to take victory over Max Verstappen. McLaren's form, which has helped it lead the Constructors' Championship, comes off the back of it being cautious with its upgrade plans, and sticking with a floor design that it first introduced back in Miami. This is an approach that is in contrast to many of its rivals, including Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, and Aston Martin, who have tried upgraded floor designs but encountered balance problems that held them back. But while McLaren's current package appears to be working well, especially on high downforce venues like Singapore, team boss Andrea Stella says it is not certain that it can stick to what it has right now. With many of its closest competitors all set to unleash their next updates at the United States Grand Prix, McLaren concedes there is a risk that if it plays safe and sticks with its current package, it could fall back. It has been working on a development step for its car back at its factory, but wants to be sure that it works before committing to racing it. Asked about the dilemma the team now faced on whether to go for upgrades now or not, Stella said, "In fairness, that was one of my thoughts after the race. We do have some stuff in the pipeline, and obviously, when you have this kind of performance on track, you always may approach things from a cautious point of view in terms of development. But at the same time, we need to trust the process. We need to trust the way we've been working so far. I've said already that we have taken our time to make sure that once we deliver trackside, we have done the due diligence. So, I don't think this will change our plans." Stella thinks that despite McLaren's advantage, it will not take much for its rivals to leap ahead if they bring upgrades that work. "In Formula One, I'm not sure you can back off too much because backing off means that the others may catch up," he said. "And we don't know what the plans of the others are. Red Bull, we see that in a track in which they thought they would not have been very competitive ultimately, they were potentially second best. And I think we haven't seen Ferrari at its best, as even in P1, P2, they seem to be as fast as us. So, I think this race may have been a bit flattering. The situation from a competitiveness point of view, I would say we need to keep being aggressive in terms of development." McLaren chief designer Rob Marshall says that the team's plan was to make sure that any upgrade it did bring helped produce a big step. "It's about chasing downforce all the time," he said. "We kind of like to gather the chunks up and deliver it in a big hit. So far, we've just been focusing on basically gathering those bits up. At some point, hopefully we'll have another upgrade to deliver. In a way, it's nice to be delivering lots of little upgrades all the time, a bit like our beam wing here this weekend. But equally, sometimes you just have to hold on a little bit while you wait for a chunk of bits to come all at the same time. The advantage in doing that is that often bits don't combine very well, or as well as you think they would. And if you deliver them in one lump, then that sort of combination of parts has been in CFD together. It was developed together. It's been through the wind tunnel together, so you can be more confident that combination of bits works well together. Whereas if you do it bit by bit, you might introduce an upgrade on one part and then work on another part and find out actually it's a bit compromised by the previous change you made." Mercedes technical director James Allison confirmed a fairly substantial upgrade package will be due for the team in Austin upon Formula One's return. The sport has begun a 4-week interval between races, before 2 triple headers that will conclude the F1 2024 season, with the teams using this time to prepare as best they can for the run-in. Mercedes went into the summer break off the back of 3 victories in 4 races, but have since taken 1 combined podium in the 4 races since the restart after George Russell's P3 finish in Azerbaijan. With a substantial gap to come, and no mandated factory shutdown, technical director Allison confirmed their final upgrades of the season are set to come with them to the Circuit of the Americas. When asked how Mercedes will be spending this gap between races, Allison told the team's post-Singapore debrief, "Well, we'll be trying to figure out how to mitigate what ailed us this weekend, how to figure out how to make the tires run better on these sort of overheating circuits, and we'll be also doing quite a lot of work to bring our last upgrade of the season together. We've got a fairly substantial set of new clothes for the car coming for Austin that we hope will give us a decent weekend there, so we've got to deliver all that and get ourselves ready for these last few races of the year." Russell held off a challenge from Charles Leclerc for 4th place in Singapore on Sunday, while Lewis Hamilton finished 6th after an early stop on soft tires. Allison praised those back at Brackley for their work at the weekend, with early indications from free practice showing that it was set to be a tough race for Mercedes. I think Sunday's result was pretty difficult for the team, and Friday was signaling some of maybe what we might have expected by way of difficulty, he said. The anomaly really was Saturday, where we managed to get from a difficult Friday to a pretty creditable grid position. And there, I have to give great credit to the team back at the factory, who really did help turn around a difficult Friday, put us much further up the grid than Friday might have suggested, and give us a result that, while disappointing, was not disastrous as a consequence. I would say that probably the trade we made, although unwittingly, was that we improved the car for single lap, for qualifying, but it was quite a painful thing then on long runs. As a triple world champion, Verstappen is used to being the focal point of attention on a Grand Prix weekend. But in Singapore, the Red Bull driver caught the spotlights for the wrong reasons, caught up in a controversy with the FIA over swearing in the Thursday press conference. The saga started with an interview of FIA President Mohammed bin Sulayem with Autosport, in which he had urged the F1 to go further in stamping out swearing from TV broadcasts. And when Verstappen described his Red Bull car as fodder on Thursday, it netted him a community service punishment from the governing body, which was met with disbelief both by himself and his colleagues. In his trademark renegade style, Verstappen staged a protest with purposefully curt answers in official FIA press conferences, only to then hold his own media gatherings in which he freely answered any and all questions. Verstappen's actions weren't just a display of his rebellious bravado and youthful insouciance, as there was a genuine undertone of discontent and bitterness with how it had all played out, and how he felt drivers were being muzzled rather than being allowed to express themselves freely, at least to a sensible degree. When you can't be yourself, you have to deal with these kinds of silly things. I'm at a stage of my career where I don't want to be dealing with this all the time. It's really tiring, he said. Of course, it's great to have success and win races, but once you have accomplished all that, winning championships and races, then you want to just have a good time as well. Everyone is pushing to the limit, but if you have to deal with all these kind of silly things, for me, that is not a way of continuing in the sport, that's for sure. It's a thinly veiled threat to quit the series, which would seem odd for an extremely well-paid 26-year-old who has been dominating his discipline, claimed 3 world titles, and might well be on his way to rewriting the history books. So how seriously should F1 take Verstappen's retirement talk? It is worth pointing out that it's far from the first time Verstappen has signaled his intention not to stick around forever. After taking his first world championship in 2021, he already stated he has little appetite to chase Lewis Hamilton's records or compete in F1 for the sake of it, and the move towards a 24-round calendar in sprint races has also dampened his enjoyment of being part of the globe-trotting circus. "I'm not a fan of it at all," he said at the start of last season, when asked for his opinion on the sprint format. "I think when we're going to do all that kind of stuff, the weekend becomes even more intense, and we're already doing so many races. We're heading into seasons where you have at one point 24, 25 races, and if we then start adding even more stuff, it's not worth it for me anyway. I'm not enjoying that." He also voiced concerns about the state of the 2026 regulations, with the driving characteristics of the new machinery another factor in his decision-making to see out his Red Bull contract until 2028. In doing so, Verstappen may come across as spoiled, throwing a tantrum when he doesn't get his way or gets slapped on the wrists, but reality is a bit different than that. Other drivers may have dealt better with the rising demands of the series, but it is worth pointing out that Verstappen is a true racer, from a family of racers. His successes have turned him into a global superstar, but reluctantly so. This is the guy who, after qualifying on pole at Imola, jumped on iRacing to help his sim racing mates win a 24-hour sim race, and who is already putting plans in place to run his own GT3 team and compete at the Le Mans 24 hours, ideally as far away as possible from F1. Verstappen turns up just to race and win and is dealing with all the additional bullshit, if you will, until he has had enough. And in his mind, the FIA's censorship and handholding, such as Ferrari's Carlos Sainz being fined for crossing a live track after his qualifying crash, are the latest elements that are starting to tip that scale as he reaches the end of his 10th season in the series. When I saw it, even like getting noted, I'm like, my God, what are we doing? These kind of things are just, for me, super silly. We're not stupid. There is the matter of Verstappen's long-running Red Bull deal until 2028. But even aside from any break clauses that could see him move to a rival team, F1 is too all-consuming for Red Bull to be holding a driver to his contract when he doesn't want to be there anymore. But we're not there yet. and it is hoped private talks between the Grand Prix Drivers Association and FIA will help take the sting out of this unwelcome episode and find a compromise. I don't know how serious they will take that kind of stuff, he said on whether or not his protest would be taken seriously by the governing body. But for me at one point, when it's enough, it's enough. Everything will go on in Formula One without me, it's not a problem, but it's also not a problem for me. So it's how it is. If you can't really be yourself to the fullest, then it's better not to speak. But that's what no one wants, because then you become a robot, and that's not how you should be going about it in the sport. Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur has defended the decision to split its race strategies at the Singapore Grand Prix. The Italian outfit endured a difficult qualifying session around the Marina Bay circuit, which left Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz starting from 9th and 10th respectively. Although both drivers started on the medium compound, Ferrari opted to pit Sainz on lap 13 to undercut some of the drivers ahead, while Leclerc did not pit until lap 36. Leclerc was able to push forward with fresher tires and overtook a handful of his rivals en route to 5th, while Sainz settled for 7th place. When asked if Ferrari considered being more aggressive with its strategy, Vasseur told media, including Racing News 365, "To start soft, you can make one position perhaps. But at the end of the day, if you want to be aggressive, you will pit lap 12 or 15 like Lewis Hamilton did, but you don't have another choice because you have to pit lap 12 because you are stuck." Ferrari is looking at an outside shot of claiming the Constructors' Championship this year as it trails McLaren by 75 points. Despite the difficult weekend in Singapore, Vasseur at least commended the strategy call to bring home points following a difficult qualifying session. At least to start with medium, we had the opportunity to extend, and the scenario of the race was a bit different. I think it was a good strategy, he added. The fact that we split the cars to do one early stop and another one we extended was also a good call. It went pretty well due to the track position at this stage. That's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.